Hey John, welcome to this episode of Vaartaalaap. Great to see you. How are you doing?
Hey, Lon, great to see you too. Yeah, things are really good over here in the U.S. Well, I mean, things are good with me. Things aren't necessarily good in the world with the coronavirus pandemic, but
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
I'm hanging in there.
So, for our viewers, John Oberg is an animal advocate, influencer, social media professional dedicated to making the world a kinder place for animals by utilizing the power of social media. He's launched his own independent project for animals through a platform called as Patreon. And that kind of piqued my interest, John. What is Patreon? Can you share some details about it?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked because it's pretty unique. And when people ask me what I do for a living, it's sort of difficult to explain in a few seconds. So Patreon is a website that takes creators, people like artists, people like activists, who otherwise normally would have kind of a difficult time making a living through their means, through their medium,
Yeah,
whether it's creating art, engaging in activism,
yeah.
things like that. So they take this concept and they make it they set it up in a way that people can actually get paid. And
Mhm.
so as a patron creator or as a Patreon creator, I am a creator. Um, I basically look to bring on people as patrons. And
Okay,
what does that mean? That means they'll pay me a certain amount of month or a certain amount of money per month.
okay,
So most of my patrons are $5 patrons. So they'll send
okay.
me $5 every month. And it's not much for a lot of people, but when you got a lot of people who do this, it adds up, and that's how I make a lot of my income. And that way I can do this work day in and day out to advocate for animals. And so I'm always working to get more patrons, which
Mhm.
makes this work more feasible for me.
Right. So, in your animal activism, how has been your journey? Have you seen any roadblocks? Because you are pretty young, and I believe you started a few years back. So, how has been your journey? What kind of obstacles you have seen?
Yeah, great asking me, or thanks for asking me that. So my journey has been a lifelong journey. So I'm 32
Mhm.
years old, and
Yeah.
I went vegan just over 10 years ago,
Okay.
at the age of 22.
Okay.
And I was vegetarian for about a year, or about 10
Mhm.
months before that. And
Okay.
then prior to that, I ate animals for the first 22 years of my life. So
Okay.
for the first, so for 2/3 of my life, I used to eat animals, all animal products.
Mhm.
Didn't really think twice about it. So, but I grew up an animal lover, like most people. I think that most people, they have compassion and consideration and respect for animals,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
they don't want unnecessary cruelty to happen to animals. So I was in that boat as well. I was also, making choices three times a day that were, I would say, hypocritical, and they were causing a lot of harm to animals and
Mhm.
causing a lot of harm that I would never do myself. So over time, I had different things that happened. I think something that is important to remember when we talk about journeys is that uh, most of the time it is a journey. It's a long, like, change happens as a result of lots of little things over the
Mhm.
course of a long time. It
Right.
often isn't a light bulb moment where things just change overnight.
Yeah.
So for me, there were a few things that happened over the course of my childhood and teenage years that led me to eventually stop eating animals. But I'll just tell you the thing that lasted it. So the
Mhm.
thing that lasted it was I was traveling around Finland, and um, I was on a really tight budget, and I met this guy who was selling prepared reindeer meat, so like reindeer sausages, reindeer meatballs, and we strike up a conversation, and I tell him how I'm on a tight budget, and he says, "Hey, come back at 5 o'clock when I'm closing up shop, and I'll give you whatever's left over." So I go back at 5 o'clock, and he gives me everything that's left over, which is literally hundreds of euros worth of reindeer meat. And
Mhm.
he gives it
Mhm.
to me in this garbage bag. And
Mhm.
so I throw this garbage bag over my shoulder, and he's like, "Hey, you want to go hang out in the library?" So I was like, "Sure, I have nothing else to do." So he and I started walking towards the library, and I've got this reindeer meat sack over my shoulder,
Mhm.
and we're just talking. and he tells me how he's an activist, and he goes on to talk about the activism he's involved with. I wasn't necessarily like super interested in that particular form of activism, but I did tell him, oh wow, that's cool, I want to be an activist too. And he asks me, oh, what kind of activist do you want to be? And I said, oh, I want to be an animal activist. And he stops, looks at me in the eyes, and he says, if you want to be an animal activist, you should probably stop eating animals like the sack of reindeer meat you have over your shoulder. And I had never once thought about it like that. How if I want to help animals, I should probably stop eating animals. And so that was like the final seed that was planted. And so shortly thereafter, I went vegetarian based on principle, the principle that, you know, if we love animals and care for animals, we should do what we can to not, you know, harm them. I didn't know anything about factory farming. I still thought that farm animals lived decent lives. And then I actually wanted to go vegan, just based on this principle as well. But I didn't know anything about animal agriculture. And over the course of months, I kind of weaned myself off of animal products. So weaning myself off of milk, eggs, you know, switching slowly from like cow's milk to soy milk, from cow's milk ice cream to coconut ice cream or coconut milk ice cream, that sort of thing. So those are little changes I made over the course of 10 months. And then I thought, okay, I'm starting to get towards, you know, I'm starting to get to the point where I feel like I might be able to go vegan. Well, I'm going to watch, or I'm going to do a little bit of research before I do it. So I did a little bit of research, and I came across a film called Earthlings. Earthlings is a documentary narrated by Joaquin Phoenix, who recently won Best Actor Oscar for Joker. And he narrates this film, and it's basically like an hour and a half of animal exploitation, how humans are exploiting animals, and it's broken up into different sections. And I watched, I think the second section is on animal agriculture, and I started watching that, and I could not take it. I had no clue the scale of suffering that farm animals were forced to endure. It absolutely broke my heart, and I knew that I could not support this cruelty any longer. And so I went vegan then, and so it's no longer just based on principle. It was actually backed up with knowledge about how these animals are being treated. So that speaks to the scale of the problem, is that it's not just that farm animals are being harmed in significant numbers, because the numbers are outrageous here in the US, and these numbers are probably pretty similar in India. 99% of animals killed in the United States are farm animals. So that 1%, that tiny slice of the pie, is all animals that are killed in the streets, killed in shelters. So cats and dogs killed in shelters, lab mice, animals hunted in the wild. All of those animals make up less than 1%. So the scale of the problem is huge. And then when you add on to that the fact that these animals are just treated in the most cruel ways, farm animals are exempt from almost all animal protection laws. So the scale of the suffering these animals endure is just absolutely unimaginable, which is why we all need to take a similar journey, whether it's now or in the future. People need to be open to the idea of changing their ways to reflect the values that they already have.
So you mentioned Joaquin Phoenix, and I was about to come to that. What do you think his speech did to masses, especially in US? I have been reading some reports that the dairy industry has not been very happy about what Joaquin Phoenix said, but he would have inspired a lot more people. How has been the reaction of his speech, of what he said in that speech?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as you all may or may not know, Joaquin Phoenix gave a very powerful speech after he won Best Actor Oscar for his role in Joker. And he gave a very, very powerful, like 2 or 3 minute speech about how we need to change our ways. We need to and he specifically, we need to be open to change and open to change, to reflect the values that we already have. We are good at our core. The things that we're doing on a daily basis, though, are counter to that. So we need to change our ways. And when I watched it, I was almost in tears. I was jumping up and down. I was so elated. It was, I think, one of the best things to happen for farm animals and veganism in months, maybe years. I think it's such a game changer. And it was pretty funny. My news feeds were just completely full of his speech because he was, he just said such powerful words. And so, because, we tend to sometimes get stuck in bubbles, my bubble is people who are animal activists and vegans. And I try to avoid the bubble, but sometimes I'm in it a little bit. And so I saw nothing but positivity about the message, but I am sure that there are a lot of people who didn't feel so positive about the message. And the reason is, it's not that they really, truly, at their core, disagree with the message that Joaquin delivered, which is basically, we need to treat animals better, and the best way to do that is to not eat them. The reason that people need to be, or the reason that people are sometimes, maybe they might say that they're opposed to this, isn't because they actually disagree with them, but it's because they feel defensive. They feel this cognitive dissonance. They actually, at their core, agree with him, but they don't want to change their behavior. So they need to justify it to themselves. They need to feel more comfortable, or they need to feel comfortable with what they're doing. They don't want to go to the buffet or to the restaurant or to the grocery store and feel guilty. They don't want to have a guilty conscience. So they will often block that out. And so it's our job as animal activists and animal lovers to, kindly and subtly and gently get people to actually start to take this more seriously.
So you mentioned a few times the word change, and behavioral change is a very hard thing to do. I mean, even as an activist, how do you bring people around? Have you had any success stories of bringing somebody around in that change, converting them maybe as a stage one into vegetarians and then vegans? Were you able to make transition for some people?
Yes. So change is so powerful. Change is, I almost hesitate using the word change, because people's beliefs don't have to change. The beautiful thing about helping animals in this way, and in this way I mean by stopping eating them or eating fewer of them, the beautiful thing about it is the fact that it's taking these beliefs that you already have and just applying them to how you eat. It's that simple. So most people, and yes, there is a very small percentage of the population who are like psychopaths and just don't have the ability to feel empathy, but 99% of people care about animals. They care about not wanting them to suffer and doing things that aren't causing animals to suffer. And so everybody is already on our side. We don't need to get people to adopt some radical worldview. It's just getting people to take these behaviors or these beliefs and philosophies that they already have, everybody already has, and just getting them to understand how they can apply that to every time they sit down to eat. So over the course of years, I have seen lots and lots and lots of people change. I'm one of them. I never thought that I could become a vegetarian or a vegan, let alone a full-time animal activist. But I am here today, and it is so possible. Just a few months before I went vegan, actually, I ate 39 chicken wings in one meal. That's the chicken. That is the wings of over a dozen chickens in one single meal on one day in 1 year. And I ate animals for 22 years. So the fact is, if I could change, anybody could change. And so when I used to do a lot of grassroots outreach when I first started. So I'd be traveling around North America doing person-to-person outreach, often handing out pamphlets to college students and to individuals There's pamphlets that talk about how animals are being treated and how they can make a difference. And so I used to have lots and lots of conversations on the street, and people would tell me every day, like, oh yeah, I got one of these leaflets before, and I am now vegan as a result. And then just conversations, just people would be like, wow, I had no clue that farm animals were treated like this. This really opened my eyes. And now that I focus most of my advocacy on social media, which I've been doing professionally for the last 6 or 7 years, now that I'm doing this full time, I am seeing every single day people sending me messages or tweeting at me, telling me how they've been impacted. I can actually read you a couple messages if you'd like. And this is, these are just examples. The thing that we need to remember, though, is that like all of us are creating things like this. Very few of us get the opportunity to see the impact that we're making. We will only ever see the tip of the iceberg, if that. The change that we each are creating by using our voices, by advocating, is huge. Just 2 days ago, or no, this is yesterday, somebody replied to my tweet and said, thanks to you, I have not eaten any meat or birds for over a month. I'm grateful you've opened my eyes.
Awesome.
And let me see if I can read another one. Somebody else messaged me a week or two ago and said, I recently turned vegan because of your page. I now understand how cruel we are to animals. And let me find one more. Somebody said, Dear John, they messaged me this privately, and they're from India as well. Dear John, you have made a remarkable impact on my psyche. May God bless you and give you more power to continue your work for the welfare of animals.
Wow.
So, yeah, these are the kinds of messages I get all the time.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm fortunate to see them because I have a large reach. But even if you don't ever see these messages, it's important for animal advocates who are watching this to understand that you are having an impact just like that. You may not hear it directly from people, but you are having an impact. And that's the reason that we can't be silent. As animal advocates, as people who want to make a difference for animals, we should really get out there, push ourselves to make a difference for them.
Sure. I mean, great stories. I see them online because of your social presence as well, and I have read some of them myself. So, indeed, very impressive, John. So, one thing is animal compassion, and as you said, there are a lot of people who love animals in different forms, different kind of animals. But especially in West, there is a myth with meat protein, and that has potentially not got busted. When I say meat protein, other forms of nutrients which are available through plants or other means, they are not thought of as having the same impact as meat protein does. How have you been able to tackle something like that when you talk about animal compassion, being able to guide people and tell them that there are alternatives in plant-based diet which can help? I mean, examples of Novak Djokovic, or there are people in the fitness world who are very fit, active, and doing professionally very well at the highest level.
Yeah, the myth protein exists because the meat industry is very powerful and has for years, for decades, really pushed this falsehood that people need to eat meat to get their protein. What's interesting is that if you ask a doctor, have they ever met someone who's protein deficient? They will say no. Have they ever met a vegetarian or vegan who's been protein deficient? The answer is no. That is a myth that has been perpetuated by the meat industry, by the power that they have. And the reason being, because they want people to continue feeling like they have to eat meat. Fortunately, you can get protein from so many plant-based sources. You can get protein from tofu, tempeh, seitan, from nuts, seeds, grains, from vegetables, from plant-based meats. So things like the Beyond Burger or the Impossible Burger or Gardein chicken tenders. You can get it from plant-based protein powder. You can get protein from so many sources, and the idea that you can only get it from animals is ridiculous. And so the idea that one, you need to get so much is ridiculous. Any protein that we don't like. Most people get way too much protein, which is actually harmful. It's not a good thing. And then the idea that you have to get it from meat is just ridiculous. And so I'm seeing that myth be broken year by year. I've been seeing that not be such um, uh, a falsehood that's been being perpetuated as much. And I think a big part of that is because of films like The Game Changers, or documentaries like The Game Changers, which everybody or most people can see on Netflix, which is so powerful. It really shows how some of the most elite activists or most elite athletes out there are actually surviving and thriving on a plant-based diet. It's really, really incredible.
Yeah. So coming to the last part of it, especially talking about India, wherein there is a world of like 40% or more people who are natural vegetarians. So people who thrive on plant-based diet plus dairy, because milk being a key component of the diet here in India, plant-based milk has not taken up that much, or soy-based milk has not taken up that much. But there is also reverence because of a religion of for cows and for animals as well. How do you see this chasm between veganism and vegetarianism, considering somebody like me in India? How do you see this panning out in future?
Well, something that's I think is important to remember is that I certainly look at progress being a positive thing and not always being so focused and obsessed with perfection.
Yeah,
So I am not a vegan who will scream and yell at you if you aren't 100% vegan. I think that people like moving along that spectrum or being further along that spectrum between standard diet and veganism, being along that spectrum, like further along, is a good thing, even if you're not all the way here. So I think it's important to remember that's really good. Um, and I think that it's important for all of us, whether you're a vegetarian or in India, or a meat eater in Sweden. If you recognize that, if you take a look at the foods that you're consuming, whether it's meat, milk, eggs, take a look at, just take a few steps back and look at where that's coming from and
right.
see how animals are being raised and treated. And if you're comfortable with what's going on and you don't think that there's animal suffering involved, then that's good that you can feel like that. But most people don't look at the experiences of farm animals.
Yeah,
And most people just don't know what's
yeah,
going on behind these closed doors of factory farms and slaughterhouses,
yeah.
whether it's in India, Sweden, the US, anywhere.
Yeah, very true. I mean, you rightly said there is an activism in terms of understanding where your product is coming from. And that's an area where probably, except big cities, you will not find something like that happening in rural hinterland or anywhere else in semi-urban constituencies. So it's very hard for people who actually move between cities, or go from their native places which are not well connected, to understand how animals have been brought up and what products they are consuming. So that's where
Mm.
the chasm is, and it will take years before something like that in terms of activism picks up. What is happening is
I
more in terms of animal compassion plus moving away from meat. So that's something which is coming up surely. But in terms of product centricity of seeing how the product has been created, that's a gap which potentially needs to be filled in.
Yeah, I have seen that plant-based milks and egg alternatives and cheese, plant-based milk products
Yeah.
are becoming more and more uh, accessible in India. Actually, I
Mhm.
actually have a friend who started a vegan cheese company there in India,
Okay.
which you and I can talk about
Sure.
separately.
Sure.
But yeah, it's pretty amazing the progress that's being made all over the globe. And so yeah, plant-based food, plant-based food is becoming so mainstream, and um, I've certainly seen it happen in the West, and I assume this is probably true in India and other places as well, where it's basically the bigger cities get
Mhm.
more plant-based options first,
Yeah.
and the reason being, you have more likelihood of more vegans being in that in those areas, but it's starting to spread out more and more. So, years ago, you'd only see vegan restaurants in like, the biggest cities, LA, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, maybe. And then they started spreading out more. And now there are vegan restaurants all over the place. Name any mid-sized city in the country, and odds are they have at least one vegan restaurant. But what's even more exciting about that is the fact that vegan food is becoming so mainstream. So places like Burger King, which has thousands of locations across the US, they all now carry the Impossible Burger. KFC is now testing vegan fried chicken. It is really amazing. And so, yeah, I think I'm very, very excited and optimistic about the future.
Sure. I read about that KFC story sometime back. So fingers crossed. And you, as you rightly said, so in bigger cities, there are things which are becoming accessible. I mean, even for people like me who are natural vegetarians, there will be a time to transition on into non-animal based products and see how it takes. Pleasure to have you today, John. Great conversation, great insights. I'm sure our viewers will love them. Maybe in future we will touch base again on other topics as well as elaborate a bit more on something like this. Thank you. Thanks a
Would love
lot.
to would love to chat with you again, Mon. Thanks so much for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.